Today, we're going to have Mike Moscato doing a presentation on some twist functions. So, Mike, why don't you go ahead and take over?
Okay. The routine we're going to run through today centers on creating PDF files for digital editions out of Twist. This is a fairly familiar routine, I think.
Are you going, did you change slides, Mike? Just to make sure it's actually sharing correctly.
I just changed the slide. Did you see it change?
Yeah, now it's changing, okay.
Okay, yeah. It's the simple things, just sharing your screen out is the most difficult.
Yeah.
One thing, I know Fred usually goes over this when we get started, is for your GoToWebinar, if you have any issues seeing the full screen, there's a little button in the top left that you can use to zoom, so you can kind of zoom your screen and get a better view sometimes, because I know sometimes some of the text we show looks a little small. As we go through this, feel free to ask any questions in the little Ask Question box you got there for GoToMeeting, and we will attempt to answer them when we get done. And I think, let's get started. Now, what I'm going to show you today, I'm going to show you many, many variations and different workflows to do this routine. You'll be sick of hearing about it and seeing it when I get done, but that's a good thing, because hopefully it'll be kind of drilled into your brain as to how we go about this. And, you know, the reasons people want to do this sort of thing, I think you're all pretty familiar with it, right? You've got files that were generated already for print. You need to repurpose them for digital editions. Got to still have searchable text. Stitching lines are a no-no, and they sometimes tend to show up even if you have a properly flattened file. Some of the tablets will show those things. These typically have to be RGB. If you've got files with, well, if they're made for print, you got to figure they probably got bleed on them if you want to crop the trim. And these things typically are a single multi-page PDF if someone had already generated one of these for some other purpose, or it's not uncommon to just have a bunch of single pages. So you have to be able to deal with both. And this list here, you'll see this as I go through. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but it often depends on whether you have, like I said, single pages, multi-pages, you have a single twist server, you have a twist cluster, and since the typical product of this is a final single PDF with all the pages, there's different ways to go about merging or splitting those all together at the end. Most notably, this one down at the bottom where you want to run this routine that they call merge with this, DALiM refers to as use the file system as a buffer. And I'm going to submit these as I play around with a web link or just through a hot folder, but if there is any interest and there's time later, obviously people who use the DALiM ES product want to be able to do this thing as well. When we get started, I'm going to go over a couple of the basic things here that are in every one of these workflows I'm going to show you, because once you get these first two things down, the top of PDF settings and your ICC conversions for RGB, the rest of it for all the workflows is a matter of managing how the files are all going to get associated with each other and so forth. The second item from the bottom is one that I think we had a question about recently from a customer, specifically how to embed an RGB profile when you're using this PDF CT vector option, and it appears there is a way. I think we were led to believe previously that it couldn't be done. And there's some hidden features we might get around to showing you. Last reminder about our webinar schedules, right? There's the URL if you want to see what we've got on the horizon. The next one that we do for DALiM related, I expect would be an ES one. I'm not sure what the subject matter is at the time. Maybe it hasn't been determined. So with all that out of the way, let's look at how to make some of these files. Let's get Keynote out of the way. So I'm going to ask Fred to chime in. Do you see my screen now, Fred?
I do. Transition fun.
Okay, good. We're going to start with the low-hanging fruit, the most basic of these workflows, but the two main tools I'm going to go into will explain the key settings for the quality and type of file, and like I said, the rest is going to be how you manage these things. Anyone who's worked with Twist for a while and has been to the users groups, I mean, what I'm about to show you is fairly familiar, but we still get a lot of questions about this sort of thing when making these files for digital edition. If we want to make them RGB, we do all the color management in the PS check tool. That's not to say that you have to, but we found that the consistency and the quality that folks are looking for, we usually get a better result controlling it from here. And these settings, I mean, are fairly straightforward if you know how the ICC stuff works, right? Our goal, in this case, I'm outputting to sRGB color space, and we know that the way Twist color manages files is we can control both raster and vector elements, and I think you can see it makes sense to have the source profiles the same for both raster and vector. Another thing we normally do here is first, if there's any spot colors in the files, we do want to convert this all to CMYK first, so the spots are gone and everything is colors managed as just CMYK data to a final sRGB color space that we're going to. And really, every workflow that you see me run today, the PS check tool is set up in this way. There is absolutely no variation on any of them that you're going to see. The real fun comes here in the final PDF output. And again, if you've worked with this routine in the past, you know that this option is the option that gives us our simplified, normalized PDF that gets rid of all the stitching lines and makes a nice, simple file that tablets should have no trouble displaying. The options that are most often changed here are the resolution. You want to resample everything too. That often depends on the type of device you're going to. And as you all probably know, that can be controlled via variables, so that can be changed on the fly based on the device you're outputting to. You'll also see that as soon as you choose this option, there are many, many settings within the tool that you do not have access to anymore. You'll notice all of the color rendering options up top are grayed out. You can't touch those. In fact, I mentioned earlier the ability to embed an RGB profile in a file when you use this routine. In the past, there used to be a way you could cheat, and you could actually activate the Embed RGB Profile option up here, but they took that away from us. But I will show you in a second how we can get around that. The stuff in the miscellaneous section, there really is nothing in here that's any different except for this little doodad you see at the bottom, which we will discuss later on. The screening option, I don't think there's an instance whether we're doing PDF CT vector or normal PDF where I have that turned on. That's usually turned off. And for the most basic approach to doing these things, since I'm going to throw it on Multipage PDF, is use that merge multi-page file. Now, the first thing I want to show you is kind of a file that's kind of a poster child for the kind of thing we're up to here. Let's look at this file. And I'm sure you can probably see the way the Mac preview shows all the stitching lines of this. Now, this is a good file. This is a flattened PDF X1A, but it's not uncommon for those stitching lines to sometimes appear when you don't want them to appear. And if we look at this file, that's what we have to deal with. This file was flattened. Frankly, I'm not sure if this was, I think this came out of InDesign this way. And again, it's a legal file for print, but you see there are issues that can crop up. So let's say that that guy just goes through our normal, simplest workflow. We're just going to throw a single file in there. And again, I'm not sure that's something you're going to do too often. Normally we're dealing with an entire issue. And that file is going to come out for us right here. And I think we know what we're going to see. If we look at the wireframe now, you can see that all of that terrible stitching stuff is gone, which is what we're looking for here. Now, I'm going to come back to this file a little later on to go over some of those other options that I told you we'll see later. But first, let's look at dealing with like a full issue or book. This is just like a 6 or 8 page PDF I threw in. I mean, we don't want to sit here and watch it grind through a 150 page magazine. But you see what's happening here. It busts all the pages out, color manages them all of them, runs the PDF CT vector routine, and finally is going to glom them all together for us. Again, that's due to the merge all pages, and here is our file. And if we take a quick look, we should definitely not be seeing any CMYK in this, right? Everything in this file is now RGB. You'll notice the file is not cropped to trim, though. We know how to deal with that, right? Crop to trim is the identical workflow I just ran. Just throw on a Create Pages tool. Crop on trim box. Probably should have had object merge turned on, but we'll ignore that for now. And let's run the same file. Now you'll notice everything I'm doing right now is with the assumption that I am a user that has a single twist server. So there's no notion of load balancing and sharing files between 2 servers. This is all handled on one machine. And we can see this file showed up for us. Same file, but now we're cropped. And that's a good file for us. There's another approach to doing this that looks a lot simpler to us. This is really the same workflow we ran earlier, but we're combining everything into the normalizer tool. So instead of having a PS check tool and an output PDF, we're doing all of our initial normalizing or handling of the file in here. There's the same ICC settings you saw me use before, and here's our PDF output settings that are the same ones we did before. So for a more simplified approach that gets us to the same place, right? We can do it that way with a normalizer tool. One disadvantage, although some people may not necessarily consider it to be a disadvantage, is if you throw a full multi-page file into that tool, you really have no notion of what's going on from the standpoint of monitoring and looking at logs. Because we could say, oh my goodness, it didn't finish in 5 seconds, which, you know, nowadays anything that takes longer than 5 seconds is just a terrible waste of time, 15 seconds. So it's a little more opaque as to what's happening, but you can see we still get the same result. The other thing I'll mention is you see here that this file isn't getting cropped to trim. Now, what I'm going to show you, I actually saw a customer do, I think about a year or so ago. We know that what emerges from the normalizer tool is a multi-page PDF. Well, you can just go ahead and crop that whole thing in one shot. You can still feed the full multi-page PDF that's been color managed and normalized and all that stuff. Stuff it straight in here, and it'll do the entire file for us and crop all of them. Let's do it. And again, everything I'm doing so far is with a single page a single PDF with multiple pages in it. And we'll go over doing singles in a second. I might have to start talking faster because the clock is ticking. Once again, we go into the normalizer tool, color manage, normalize, file PDF out. And notice what create pages does. It actually tells us, hey, I'm dealing with 8 pages. I'm going to take care of all of them for you, and all in one crop. You can see we're good to go. So now let's deal with a case where you want to do everything we just did, but you've been provided not with a single multi-page PDF, but with all of the pages as single pages. Now, one of the keys for any of these workflows is whenever you've processed all the pages and you want to split them or merge them back together, you have to know how many pages to expect so that Twist knows when to combine them, right? If you have single pages and you're working in, say a Twist-only environment, probably the easiest way to do this is with WebLink. The reason being, WebLink gives us the ability to capture a page count of everything of all the files that have been submitted. So for instance, here are 8 single pages that are all going to go into this workflow. Again, the workflow is running on a single Twist server. Let's send them. Now, because these are all single individual pages, you cannot use the Output PDF tool to use that merge function because the one page doesn't know anything about the other. So instead, we use the tool called Filter Group to combine them all together. You can see how those things all just got consumed and splodged together. And should have ourselves a file here. There he is. Again, same thing we did before. That's when we should stop and pause to show how the heck did we do that, right? This variable, let's see, right there is the key variable we need to know. DALiM has misspelled this for years. The verbiage is submitted file count, although I think I'd pronounce that submitted. But basically, it knows how many files were uploaded through that WebLink uploader. It knows we gave it 8. Now, if I did something, let's say I had a 100-page book. Let's say I uploaded a batch of 50, then I came back and uploaded another batch of 50. That's not going to work for us. We need to upload the whole job or project at once so that that file count variable is captured. That gets fed into the Filter Group tool. And if you're familiar with this tool, this takes several files and combines them together, and it's keyed off of this number of files option. And what we do is we feed in the submitted file count into that field. So now Twist knows how many to expect before it combines them and pushes them all out. It's a fairly old tool. So now you've been working with one Twist server, and you decide you're going to buy another Twist server because you are doing too much work, because you've turned your workflows into cash flow. That used to be one of the old DALiM shirts, I think. Turn your workflow into cash flow, of course.
Yeah, unfortunately, remember that one.
Yes, that was one heck of a shirt. So we're going to do everything the same. Well, kind of, sort of. This workflow is going to load balance it for us, and we're going to be, extra happy because everything's going to go so much faster now. So you'll see that some of these went to my laptop server, some of them went to this other Twist server. They go to the Filter Group tool, they're waiting to merge, and what's going to happen is they are never going to merge. So this presents us with a problem when we're in the Twist cluster environment. files on the one server don't know anything about the files on this one, and vice versa. So the problem we run into then is we either have to run the workflow on only one twist server. If we're running 8-page jobs, nobody would probably care. But if you're running 120, 160-page book, you really don't want one twist server doing all the work while the other one sits there doing nothing. So we need a way to be able to run the same routine but utilize the horsepower of both of our twist servers, because this one is never going to finish. So now we get into all the workflows you've seen so far are pretty straightforward. I mean, I think that probably has the most tools, which has got 7 tools in it, right? So we need to find a way that 2 twist servers can work on the same job and be able to combine and merge them together for us. And that's this guy. Now, this is one we've shown at Duo before, but I don't think we've ever gone too deep into how it works, especially with this one specific procedure that's in it. So let's try to get through this. The approach that we use here is, instead of using something like the filter group tool, which we know can't work across twist servers, as files come in, we dump them into this, I just refer to as a staging folder. So every time a file comes through, right, it does everything it did before: color manage, make a PDF, and it stashes it in this folder. Color manage, PDF, stash. So again, we're presented with the issue, how do I know when I've done all the pages? How do I know how to gather them all up? The first thing that we need to know is that on both twist servers, this is a common path. So they typically have to be something that's shared out that both servers can get to, and the path is the same on both twist servers. The other thing we want to know is, as we dump files in here, again, we have a notion of how many files we need to merge. If we do it with WebLink, it's that variable called submitted file count. In fact, if you look in here in one of these tools, I make a variable called total pages that's keyed off of that. So when we submit with WebLink, we know how many are expected. There's a procedure that we're running in the background. It's very specific to this routine. And what it's doing is it's constantly checking that folder where we're stashing these files. Every time a file comes in, it counts how many files are in the folder, then it compares it or checks it against the expected number of total pages. Now, I won't get too deep into some of the ticklage here, but you'll see right here, this first line, what it says is, if var1, if the total pages, equals var3, which is basically how many files, right, are in that folder, it then makes this file, it's basically a list. This merge list basically says, these are all the files that are in there. And it returns, whenever we have return 1, the file will follow this link. So the last file in comes this way and then calls the PDF worker routine. PDF worker is a routine that DALiM runs behind the scenes that they use for a lot of their PDF manipulation. You'll notice it's running this option -mf, and you'll see the PDF worker routine -mf is telling us that it's reading the files that it has to merge, and then it's going to create the final output PDF from that list. It's grabbing the list from that folder where the procedure created it. It's going to stash them for us, right? So we do the final transmit. And the other thing that we like to do is, it's a good idea to clean that stuff out afterwards. Otherwise, you're going to constantly be filling up your file system with these things. So after they've merged and they've been moved, we go back and we flush that folder so that stuff isn't hanging around anymore. So does that actually work? Let's see. Let's go here. You'll notice also I've got the little variables in here for the type of device I might be going to, because we can use that to control our PDF output settings. You know, maybe you want different resolutions for different devices. Let's run this guy through. You're going to see it show up on both of my Twist servers, although that guy seems to be doing more of the work. Many of them say they're filed in the wait folder, right? Because they are not the last page. Here's the last page. He should gather everybody up, which he did. Merge the PDFs, send them on their way, flush the folder. And you see what we, this is fairly familiar stuff. You can capture variables and make the folder structure. There's the job name, iPad. There's our final file. One thing I'll also show you, and this is, again, not an uncommon request. Let's say everything, all things being equal, the only change they want to make is the type of device they might be going to. Let's run it again. What we should see happen in here actually, I think I might have removed the tool. That might not have worked. Let's see. No, there you go. Yeah, there is. I have a tool in there somewhere that changes the resolution. So you can see the iPad file came out at 1.2 megs. This one for next issue came out at 534. I'm not really sure where I had that in here. Oh, there it is. Or if we identify the device type as next issue, change the resolution and output PDF to 100 dpi. How much more blabbing can I do here, Fred? Because there's a couple more things I want to go over. Are we good to continue for another 4 or 5 minutes?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I think I have this in this one. Yeah. I talked earlier about the request or the desire to be able to embed an RGB profile in one of these things. If you go in your Output PDF tool, as I mentioned before, this stuff is grayed out. But in recent patch updates, especially if you're working with Twist 7.5, you might have noticed this option appear that says Write Output Intent. If you enable that, then go to Output Intent. You can select here the profile that you want to embed. I'm going to tell it that I want sRGB embedded in here. And save it. And I'll just dump one of our, we'll do a different file because that leaflet is getting a bit boring. This one is like a 16-page. It shouldn't take too long. Of course, I should have done it in the one that's running on both Twist servers to go twice as fast, but I'm really not that smart.
Seems like you're getting most of the stuff on one of them anyway.
Yeah, it's the one machine is a laptop, so he's kind of pokey. Plus, he's a 4.5-year-old laptop, so he can't keep up. But this one, you can see, is all done. And it should come in. There he is. So if we open this guy up, right, same game, but you'll see there's the sRGB profile now embedded in it. So if you feel the need to do that, that's a can do. Okay, I'm going to go over one more thing here. This is the one that I kind of showed a quick glimpse of earlier. If you're using the PDF CT vector, in a lot of ways, what it does has always been kind of a mysterious process, right? It just magically rasterizes and flattens these things and spits out a file, and everybody says, oh, isn't that amazing? But wouldn't it be nice if there was some extra control? These two options here are a couple that, the old garbage collector. These are a threshold value that can be used to determine which objects get rasterized to that kind of one all-encompassing CT and which remain as vectors. Now, the numbers here are, you know, I'm not going to say they're arbitrary, but it would take, I think, a lot of trial and error to figure out what the best setting is. These are the defaults in Twist. What these are is a threshold. So what this basically says is if an object has more than 1,000 sigma points, what is a sigma point? Frankly, I'm not sure, but I assume it has to do with the complexity of an object. If it's above that threshold, it'll get rasterized into the background. If it's below it, it'll remain as a vector object. Now, if you said to yourself, I never, ever, ever want anything to come out as a vector, I want the whole thing to come out as CT, you set that guy to 1. So let's run that file that I had earlier, because I want to show you kind of an interesting result of doing something like this. And then we can go on to any questions that you may have. This is going to generate 2 versions of this file. And let's see, they should come out here. Sigma settings. So let's open both of these files up. The one on the left, make sure I get this straight. Yeah, the one on the left is the normal default settings for Twist. And I think I showed you this before. This is a pretty simplified file, but there still are a few items that are vector. Most importantly, what I want to point out is in this original file, this text down here, positions formula, it's not text. In the original file, those are outline paths. So you can see that it kept a nice vector edge on it for us. If I set that sigma option to 1, which means everything to the background, notice there's nothing in this page except the text. The text will always remain as text, right? But that nice vector edge we got on those outline paths now is gone because it's forced that to the CT, again, based on that ridiculously low value I gave it. So if you want all to go to CT, no vectors, only the text, that setting will do that for you. But I think it's one of those things that should be labeled use with caution. I think any experimenting that you do with these sigma point settings, you should be pretty sure of what you've gotten through your testing before you implement something like that in production workflow. I'll point out the one on the bottom is for strokes. This one's for fill objects, that's for stroke objects. And normally, if you just open up the output PDF tool, you don't see those. It's only after you save PDF CT vector setting that it writes it into the param file, and I'm probably not going to find it. I looked for it earlier today and I couldn't find it. But it gets defined down here in the param file. QRS. Yeah, it is in there. In fact, if it's not in the param file, it will not show up in the GUI. That was the point I was trying to make. Unless it's in here, you won't see that thing show up in the GUI. Now, I'll find it later. But it has to be there because the setting wouldn't be there. So that We could probably go for another half hour, but you'll never want to use this routine again if you hear any more about it.
All right, Mike.
So do we have any questions?
That's informative. I have a couple of questions. One, I'm sure you could feed this through an ES workflow. What would, what changes do you have to make if you're feeding it from ES?
There's really not that many. In fact, I did have an ES job set up in case somebody asked this question. The main thing that we need to know, in fact, I kind of forgot to point this out earlier, is not only do we need to know the total number of pages, but we need to know the page number on this stuff so they could go in the proper order. For instance, when I did this thing with the singles, right, there is filter group in this case was picking a page number off here, so it did them in the right order. If you're doing a multi-page PDF from here, it always knows the right order. ES, we need to feed total page count and a folio number. So for instance, let's say I actually had an ES job that was ready to do this. What are the chances? So we know in ES you can capture variables like folio number, right? And total page count is a variable called page count in ES. So if we look at an ES workflow that's going to try to feed this thing, once we throw all the pages at it, we have to tell the twist workflow that so it knows the page number, that so it knows how many pages are in it. That one it doesn't need. I was messing with this earlier. This one is helpful if you want to use one common workflow. So for instance, I was playing around with that workflow we did earlier, and if I just wanted to feed it from ES, I could use the same one and then route it differently so it knows the file came from ES. But we'll just do the basics. There's our 16-page job, right? And they need to go to the printer. So someone approves them all, and off they go. And uh-oh. How did we get a failure?
Yeah, actually, there's another question about what happens if one of the files fail.
Well, trust me, I didn't plan that. Let's see. Let's back him up. So basically everything is staged and ready. From a project workflow, I'm basically telling it to release everything. And what we should see happen, and we do, is the pages start appearing in Twist. If we look at show memories, we can tell right here that, let's see, total pages is 16, right? We need the project name so that we can associate everything together under a common job or file. And this, yeah, it looks like my laptop decided he wants to finish these up. That should be the last page. It merged them all. And again, the routine it ran is the same one we did earlier. Uses a staging folder, finds the final page. When he goes here, he merges them all together, and off they go. As you probably know, something like that, if you chose to, could be looped back into ES. There's our files.
And the answer to the question about question about if a file failed, like in Twist or going from ES to Twist in this case, basically since he's doing a count on the number of files in the staging folder, as long as that hasn't been reached and you drop another file, once it reaches that expected number of files, it'll continue. So if you do have a file that fails, you can fix it, reprocess it, and then everything will stitch together.
Yeah, but I'll show you real quickly here. although mine already finished. The fact is, if you know the folder where it stages these things, actually what I should have done is I should have just released 15 of those and not 16. But you can look in the folder and you can tell, you know, oh, it aborted and there's 2 missing or there's 1 missing. There's no reason to panic. Just back up the files in ES that failed, assuming you know why they failed, and you can get them to go through again, right? And if you then release them again, when they go through the workflow, it's going to check that folder again. If it checks it, counts them all up, and now it's got the proper page count, off they go. I will say this, though. If you're ever testing or debugging this specific routine out of ES, and you misconfigure something and you get files that abort and fail or whatever, when you want to start fresh, it's a good idea to go in and wipe out that folder where there, maybe 4 or 5 files got in there. Wipe it out, start over again, because what will happen is if you forget about it, when you subsequently run some files through, it will actually match the total page count earlier than you might have thought it should, because it already had some files in there to begin with. So, like for testing purposes, as you go through variations, clean that thing out if you had some earlier things fail.
All right. And then just to finish real quick, somebody's asking if the files that are created through a process like this can be used for print if you make them CMYK instead of RGB.
Well, you could, but
yes, I think the answer would be you could, but based on resolution, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah. In fact,
because you are really changing the file.
Yeah, and as I meant, normally the files we're starting with are files that were already generated for print.
Right.
One of the key takeaways for the reasons people run this is to make a more simplified file that will render consistently. Right. Yeah, will render consistently on tablets, whereas that flattened file for print that we saw earlier, it may have looked pretty complex, but modern RIPs that people are using in print plants tend to be able to handle that sort of stuff.
And I think that there's a couple other questions, but I think we're already a couple of minutes over. So we'll answer anybody else by email. I want to thank everybody for attending. You should get a thank you email tomorrow. It'll be a link to the video for the webinar. And if you have any ideas for future webinars you'd like us to cover, feel free to do that. We'll be happy to cover anything you're looking for, put in one of these sessions. So again, thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.